We are officially recording as of now, so sir, take it away.
Okay, thank you and welcome everybody. Good morning for those who are in their time frame in the morning. Here in Italy, it's 6 p.m. So I'm just introducing myself. My name is Federico Marangoni. I'm a reenactor. I'm an historical fencing instructor, and I'm an historian mainly focused on historical costume and fashion history, mainly on the period between late Middle Ages, starting from the 12th century, to the Renaissance time and early Baroque times, so 16th and 17th century. This year, 2021, is the seventh century anniversary of Dante's Alighieri death. So I thought that could be interesting for you people and for reenactors of many different periods to know and to learn something about this man more than this figure, because the aim of this first lesson mainly, and then also some part of the next one, will be to describe Dante in his time. In fact, the lesson is called Dante Life and Heritage, exactly because I want to show how he lived in his time and some very important events he took part to, and later how he became the symbol of medieval poetry and Italian poetry for a lot of reasons, but during a certain amount of centuries and even after a certain degree of standardization of his image. But in this lesson we will start talking about Dante as a person. I suppose you know, everyone knows at least the minimum of information about him, but he was born in Florence. He lived between 1265 and 1321. He was an important member of the Florentine society of his time. He was not only a poet, a writer in general, but he was also a politician. He took part and participated to the political government of the city. He was several times in several different councils, and he had the chance to decide the politics of his city. And he also was a member of a society where fighting was something that the city would ask to their citizens, and for this reason, to its citizens. And for this reason, he also fought for Florence in a period which was very crowded of battles. It was very frequent that cities among different part of Italy could take part in battles between main cities. So Florence was one of the main cities at that time, but still in the 13th century, the city was not the most important in Tuscany, and it was big, but not the most powerful and the most important. And for this reason, during the century, several battles contributed to its wealth and greatness when Florence was able to win them. We will see how Dante took part also in this fact. As a writer, he didn't write only the commedia, the comedy, which was later called divine. He just called it comedy, and that is the main work by Dante. He wrote it mainly when he was not in Florence anymore. It is a sort of a literary testament because he put all his beliefs, all his ideas, all his criticism towards Florence, but also to specific people. He used the poem to write really everything he had in mind about the world and the world he was living in, and the situations and the politics of his time. So it is a poem. It has a religious subject in a certain way, because it's a trip it's an allegoric trip from the hell to the paradise, meaning that the soul of a man, of Dante in particular, and of mankind in general, can be saved, but also a trip to reach peace, to gain the peace that he was looking for after a dark period, which is not only the exile that he suffered from his city, but also from his the loss of his beloved Beatrice, the woman that he loved for all his life, and the woman that is inside the comedy. She actually is the main character to move all the action in the comedy. At the beginning of the comedy, we learn that Beatrice went to Virgilio to talk to him and convince him to help Dante, because God and the Holy Virgin told her so. But this is something that she does to help Dante. But he didn't only wrote the Commedia. He also wrote the several political texts, and the most elegant, the most complex works were written in Latin, while instead he wrote several other works in Italian language. So, for example, La Vita Nuova, Il Convivio, which means, La Vita Nuova means the new life. It's the description of his love to Beatrice, how he met her, how he fell in love with her, and so on. And other works in Latin are, for example, the De Vulgari Eloquentia, which tells to educated people, so this is in Latin, how the Italian language could be used to write even important matters, important subjects. And this is the reason he writes the Commedia not in Latin, as, for example, Petrarca will do with a lot of his poems, but he writes it in Italian, because he wants people to understand it in the widest manners. And he also wants people to appreciate how the young language could be used for important subjects. And he also wrote the Monarchia, which is important because the Monarchia, it's about kingdoms, it's about the king. Actually explains his point of view regarding the relationship between the emperor and the pope, and the papal power and the pope's power and the emperor's power, which was very difficult at that time. It's the century when Frederick II was born. Okay, actually Frederick II had died in the 1250, but he was one of the most difficult emperor to deal with for the popes. And Dante, with this text, wanted to clarify and to explain his vision of two suns. It's famous, this idea of the two suns. So nothing like the moon and the sun, one less important than the other, but emperor and the pope are two suns, and they could be equals, each one in his different on his different subjects, on different manners. But anyway, the Monarchia was one of the reasons why he was not much appreciated in later periods like 17th and 18th century, because during the 17th century this text was put in the Pope's index of forbidden books. So because it was perceived and understood as a pro-emperor book. And for this reason, we in Italy and in Europe, people started reading less Dante during the 17th and early 18th century, and then it was rediscovered, but we will talk about that later. And then he wrote sonnets, he wrote poems, he wrote letters, he wrote a lot of works. But first of all, we should start from his name, from the man that he was. And for this reason, I would like to start with a quote, quite an important quote. I'll start the presentation now. Okay. Okay. This Latin verse, it's a quote which means that Rosa, stat rosa pristina nomine, nomina nuda tenemus, means that the rose, the original rose, is exists before all other roses, and nouns, nomina, are just the things that we can keep after things pass. You probably will understand better the meaning of this verse, which comes from a modern book, even if it is a modification of a more ancient verse. If I show you this quotation. What's in a name? That which we will call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, which comes from Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, and says something different and something similar to the original Latin verse. It means that the names are not the only thing that define things, but if we compare the ideas and the periods when those sentences were written, one in Shakespeare's time and the other one is written inside the Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose, it gives the title to the book. Well, we will see that they refer to something similar. They refer to the importance of giving names to things in order to understand them and to be able to use them properly. So let's start from some names of Dante's life and Dante's family. Here you can see a part of his heraldic tree, family tree, which starts by Dante's own words. We know it from a part of the comedy. It starts from Cacciaguida, an important night in Florence during the period of the Crusades. And in fact, he says to Dante, Dante meets him in paradise. He says to Dante that he went with the Emperor Conrad to the Crusade, and he died there in 1147. Son of Cacciaguida was Alighieri, which was the person from whom the surname of the family came. And then we have Bellincione. As usual, Bellincione gave his son his father's name. And then we have these three brothers and sisters, Durante, Francesco, and Gaetana. And Durante had some other sons. But where's Dante in this image? Actually, Dante is here. We now call Dante a man who actually was called Durante, or actually in Florence it was very common to call people by a shortened name. So we often find, for example, names like Maso for Tommaso, or Tana for Gaetana. As you can see here, she was Dante's sister. And for this reason, in the documents, in the original documents from 13th century Florence, you can find sometimes Durante Alighieri and sometimes Dante. But the important thing about Dante Alighieri at that time is that he has a surname. Dante Alighieri actually means Dante, sons of descending from a man who was called Alighiero. And giving this name to all the members of the family meant that that family was important, that they were renowned for the members of his family. And this means that Dante's family was actually quite famous and quite important and rich in Florence at that time. In fact, it was quite important. His family was rich. Actually, I'm sorry, not so rich because of the action of their ancestors. Dante's father probably worked as a usurer, and in the time he used to lend money and gain money from that activity. They were quite ancient, at least from what Dante says. We know that they come from a century ago, before his time. And this is why, using the words of his ancestor Cacciaguida, he criticizes inside the comedy the new people coming to Florence and sometimes getting quite rich, but they are new people, they are new villains, as Dante says. For example, about the Cerchi family. The Cerchi family was one of the families in the richest families in Florence, but not as old as the Alighieri or as the Donati, which was another family quite close to their houses. In fact, Dino Compagni, who is another politician of the same age of Dante, says that those Cerchi were uomini di basso stato, ma buoni mercanti e gran ricchi. So they were lower level men, lower class men, but they were good merchants and so very rich. And they used to dress quite well, and they had a lot of servants and horses, and they looked good in their good fabrics and jewels and so on. So we can imagine Dante in a city where there were ancient families with wealth coming from ancestors. There were new families of people coming from the countryside and getting rich there, because actually Florence was a very rich city. It was growing fast. It was building a lot of things. A lot of buildings were built during Dante's life and in his period. For example, the Palazzo della Signoria, the one that is the symbol of Florence nowadays. Santa Maria Novella, Santa Maria del Fiore, those two very important and very famous churches were started and built during Dante's period. And so for this reason, there were a lot of chances of earning money and getting rich. But I told you that probably Dante's father had some activities which were not usually considered completely fair at that time. I'm not using the term legal exactly for a reason. And how do we know that his father was an usurer? We don't know it from some trial or some cause before a judge. We know it because there is a tenzone, a poetic fight between Dante and Forese Donati. Forese Donati was a member of the Donati family and actually was a cousin of Dante's wife, Gemma Donati. So they were related. And we have a series of sonnets, 6, 3 from Dante and 3 from Forese, which are used to fight one against the other. It was common at that time, and it was it was coming from a Latin tradition as well. So they were poems, quite trivial sometimes, where people insulted, joking obviously, but they insulted each other and used some insulting topics to say that one was not so good at something and the other one was not so good at something else. We can have a look at them. We can. I won't show you the complete texts in Italian, but they are online. You can find them on Wikisource, for example. And those texts are quite funny. The first one is from Dante to Forese, and he says that the wife of Forese's wife is always coughing because she is cold during the night because he's not a good lover. So he leaves her always alone, and she gets cold. And then Forese answers to Dante in another sonnet, saying that during a walk, he met Dante's father in a graveyard as a ghost from a tomb, who was an unpeaceful spirit. He was not at peace because Dante still not had redeemed his name. So he starts saying that the Alighieri's name was not so good at that time, not so considered, not so renowned. And Dante says that Forese is going here and there looking for money because he's very gluttonous and he spends a lot of money for his food, and this is the reason his wife is always alone as well. Then Forese answers to Dante that Dante is the poor one compared to him, and Dante goes begging here and there in the hospices of Florence, even to the public soup kitchen. There was an hospice where people could get some food, and Forese says that Dante is going to go there because he doesn't have money. And then the things get more personal because Dante starts saying that Forese's father is not actually his real father, so he's not he's an illegitimate son, and he's so in debt for his gluttony that he has to steal, and one day or another he will be hung for stealing. The last sonnet is by Forese to Dante, and says that Dante is a coward because he didn't revenge an insult given to his father. So everyone knows that Dante is a coward, and that is much worse than being a gluttonous. Actually, Dante put Forese, who died in 1296, so before Dante wrote the comedy, but Dante puts Forese in purgatory, so they are friends. He doesn't put him in hell, but he puts him in purgatory, and actually he puts him there for his gluttony. So probably Forese was used to love eating and having good food on his table. I don't share the idea of Dante about his sexual activities, but that is for his business. Anyway, you can see that this is very similar to something that nowadays happens. Okay, it's a medieval rap battle. Okay, Dante and Forese are fighting each other, insulting each other. We can see Eminem doing the same. Okay, but they do it in verses and they do it in sonnets. And this is my first attempt to show you that Dante, the great poet, can also be seen as a person more down to earth. Okay, more. He was a man. He was passionate about things. He was joking about things, and so on. His myth started later, started partially during his life and partially later. Now we can continue the Okay, so we saw him fighting as a joke, but he participated to a real battle. That was a real fight, and that was on the 11th of June, 1289. During the Battle of, now it's called Battle of Campaldino. At that day was called the Battle of San Barnaba because it happened on the day of San Barnaba. And it was near the Poppy Castle, which is still there, and I show you here in these two pictures. This is a wonderful place. Now it's filled with statues with Dante, but inside the castle there are nice 14th century frescoes with several courtly scenes and things like that. And in the plain near the castle, actually, Dante took part in a battle. Here you can see the very high view. So here's Firenze, here's Arezzo. The battle was between those two cities, but actually Arezzo was on the Ghibelline side. So they were, let's say, formally pro the emperor, and Florence instead was of the Guelph party. So they were more close, they were closer to the Pope's positions. Even if then there are many variation on, I will not go inside the politics of that time, which was quite complicated. And anyway, Florence and Arezzo were on opposite political sides, and there were some people from Arezzo living in Florence because they were exiled from Arezzo, being of the losing party. Okay, so Florence decides to attack Arezzo and prepares the army. But instead of going along the valley of the Arno to Arezzo, they decided to go on another path, which was unexpected for the people of Arezzo. And they decided to go through, to pass over a mountain and to go through Casentino, which is the northern part of Arezzo province. And they arrived in Poppi, where the other army, the army from Arezzo, met the Florentine army. So from Arezzo, the army went to intercept the Florentine army in order to have the chance to stop their conquest. Because here in this area, there were many castles which were small and not able to sustain a siege from a big army like the Florentine one. We are talking about around 10,000 people from each army, something like that. So they had to defend their countryside. This part of Tuscany was under the control of Arezzo, but then there were smaller communes here and there, like Città di Castello, San Sepolcro, and so on. And for this reason, in this place, the battle was decided to be done. Actually, the battle was uncertain until the end, because Arezzo's the knights from Arezzo were better trained. They were knights. They were of ancient families and well equipped and so on. While Florentine knights were less effective, and at the beginning, in the first encounter between cavalry from both sides, the Florentine knights were hit very badly. Dante was among the feditores, was among the first knights to hit and to charge against the enemy. But actually, we know from later, from a man who read some letters by Dante, we know that he was very frightened by the charge of Aretine's cavalry, because they were very powerful, very effective, and they managed to hit back against the Florentine army. But that was their problem. They got too close to the Florentine army, and the crossbowmen were from Florence were able to hit them and to kill a lot of knights in the Aretine army. On that moment, they managed to, the infantry from Florence managed to close the people from Arezzo in a pincer movement. So they managed to close them inside a circle of troops. And from that moment, even if they kept fighting, they started their defeat. Corso Donati, Forese's brother, participated to the battle as well, and was very effective in separating infantry from cavalry in the battle from Arezzo. So the Guelphs, the Florentine, won the battle, and it was a very important victory for them, because some years before, around 30 years before, in 1260, they had suffered instead a great defeat by Senese and the Aretine army. But as I told you, we know that Dante was in the battlefield on that day. Can we imagine how he was equipped, how he was dressed while fighting on the battlefield? We can. I'll show you some images about how he would look at that time. Okay, this is a fresco which is in San Gimignano, and it comes from the very year of the battle. It's in the 90s of the 13th century, and here we see a tournament actually between two knights, but they were probably depicted with the things that knights used at that time. So they had coverings for their horses, used to display their heraldic signs, but also to protect a little the horse. They wore chainmail on legs and on the body, on the arms. They had helmets, closed helmets, with some, in this case, probably some heraldry over them, and also some other things that we see here, which are probably made in leather in this case, but are the first attempt to protect more efficiently the knight more efficiently, right? Because there were crossbows during the battles, and crossbows are more powerful than bows, and so the chainmail is not enough to protect the knight. But apart from those images, I can also show you the text of the documents that Florence wrote as a compulsory equipment for their knights. We know from documents of those years, in particular from the Book of Montaperti, which is a series of documents about the Battle of Montaperti, the one that Florentine lost in 1260. We know that the knights had to wear a pantherium sive aspergum, which in medieval Latin means pancera, something to protect the pancia. Pancia is the belly, or usbergo, which is the full chainmail, and then hoses in metal, metal hat, so the helmet, the open helmet, at least, this is at least, and then lamerias ver corazas, which are terms for something probably made with leather, and something probably made with metal, with the plain pieces of metal. So in this period, and the half of the 13th century, we already have the first attempt to create what will become later the full plate armor, which will be full just in late 14th century and then 15th century. Then they have to have a spear, a shield in different shapes, and probably under the chainmail they would have worn a zuppa armandi, which is the fabric protection for the body, something quite thick for the body. So it is not the image we have of Dante. Okay, again, we don't usually image, we don't see in our mind Dante wearing a spear, using a spear or a sword, or Dante fighting and insulting some of his friends. Well, these are two sides of a man of that time, and Dante was a man of his time. We also know that Dante, as I told you, was very, very afraid for his life. He thought he could die, and that on that day. But the very next year, he met someone very, very important. He lost, sorry, someone very, very important for him, Beatrice Portinari. In fact, Beatrice died in 1290, and the very strange thing for us to understand is that he he talked to her just twice in his life, and actually he tells us the story of those encounters. First, they met when they were kids. They had 9 years each one. Beatrice was a few months younger than Dante, and she was wearing a nice dress in a very noble color, humble and honest, sanguigno, which means of the blood, color of the blood. So she was wearing a red dress, and he fell in love with her at a party, meeting where he went with his father. So Dante, as a kid, fell in love with this girl, but he met her again in Florence just 9 years afterwards, not earlier. He says that in the Vita Nova, the story of his love, and in 1283 she greeted him. They met while she was walking here and there in Florence, and she greeted him. Can you imagine something similar nowadays? It's much simpler now, but he kept his love for all that time, and for this reason he kept talking about her in his work, in his poems and so on. And he wrote the Divine Comedy in order to glorify her. The figure of Beatrice is quite difficult to trace historically, because she was not very important. Women at that time did not leave so many traces of them. They were not allowed to have public roles and so on. But we know that she was part of the Portinari family, which was an important family in Florence at that time. And we know several things right from Dante. Can we imagine how she would have looked? Well, again, we can, but we have to be careful not to use modern images, as the one I'm showing you, to understand how Dante and Beatrice would look at that time. This is a Pre-Raphaelite painting depicting right the meeting I was telling you about earlier. Dante meets Beatrice while she is walking in Florence with a white dress, wearing a white dress with a friend of hers and a servant. And this is another image that we get from Dante Gabriele Rossetti, which is called the Salutation of Beatrice. Again, it is not an historical source, but we have to admit that Pre-Raphaelite painters were quite careful in reading the sources. because here we see that she's wearing, here she's wearing the white dress as Dante says in the Vita Nova. And here she's wearing a red dress with a green cloak and a white veil, right as Dante depicts her in the Divine Comedy when he meets her in the paradise. Beatrice is, this is a manuscript from the early 14th century, manuscript of the Divine Comedy. And here we see Dante meeting Beatrice. Beatrice is among the representation of the virtues, and she is wearing a red dress with a white veil and a green cloak, exactly like the verses say. So Dante Gabriele Rossetti was careful to read Dante. Is depiction faithful? Well, we have to understand from the original sources how Beatrice could have looked like. So what would she wear in her everyday life? She would have worn a veil after her marriage. Consider that Beatrice was married to a man and Dante was married to another woman. They were not married together. They were not together. He loved her. We don't know exactly how she felt about him. But during the Middle Ages, when you are married, you have to cover your head. Actually, even before you are married, after you are not a kid anymore, which was around 12 years old. So she would have worn something like this, a veil or a wimple. This is properly a wimple on her head and covering her throat. And here we can see the camicia. Camicia is the most internal part of the clothing. It's directly on the skin. It's a light dress, which is usually covered by the gonnella. Gonnella is the cloth, the piece of garment that goes over the camicia. Gonnella in the period of Beatrice could have buttons on the ending part of the sleeves and on the neckline, because actually buttons started spreading in fashion during the second half of the 13th century. She was a wealthy woman, so probably she would have had a few of them on her sleeves. And then under the veil, we don't see it here, but we can see it here clearly here. She could have worn coif, cuffia, to hold her hair inside the coif. That was very often used by servants and women from the lower classes, but could be worn also by high level, high class women. And here we can see also a two-color gonnella, so that was possible. And over them, a guarnacca. Guarnacca is the overgarment that usually goes over the gonnella. It's not decent, it's not elegant that you wear a gonnella going here and there in the city without some overgarment. You're not a woman from the countryside. You want to show yourself, to show that your family is wealthy, so you wear also a guarnacca. But in summer you can have a guarnacca without sleeves. So here the guarnacca is the red dress and the gonnella is the white one, white as the dress that Dante says Beatrice was wearing. Or you can have sleeves as well. So guarnacca could or could not have sleeves as well. So we don't know a lot of Beatrice by historical sources. We don't have a depiction of her from her time. We will see if we can say that we have a depiction of Dante from his time in the next hour. But sure, at least I tried to show you those aspects that make the great poet more similar to us. If you are asking yourself how, what kind of dresses, what kind of garments Dante would have worn at his in his life, during his life, we will discover it in the next part of the lesson. If you have questions, this is the very right moment to ask. I hope I wasn't too fast, and even if I didn't explain myself well enough, you can ask whatever you want.
It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat, so at this point, I am going to stop the recording.